Hello, everyone, and welcome to Food for Thought, a digital residency program put on by Womanly Magazine. This is our first session, Finding a Future in Food. I'm so excited for everyone to be here with me. My name is Deja Beeman, and I will be the facilitator/artist for these sessions. I will give you a little bit of information about me before we get started with this first session. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Ohio State University. So I'm living in Columbus, Ohio right now. I've enjoyed cooking ever since I was a kid. I used to watch Food Network a lot, like all the time, especially being a latchkey kid. So that plus my grandma always making me participate in making the meals and just being home alone a lot, I really developed an interest in cooking and a fascination with cooking and a strong love for food. So when this residency opportunity popped up on my timeline, my friend actually sent me the call for the Womanly Magazine 6th issue, which you also have a copy of right now. And they were thinking a lot about food, nutrition, and access. And at the same time, I had been, what's the word for it? Manically cooking, maybe, to sort of ease my anxiety as the stay-at-home orders had been put in place. So my friend was like, yo, you've been cooking. I know you've been wanting to write about cooking here. And so I sent in the essay, which is also in issue 6, called Growing a Garden at the End of the World. And in it, I was just trying to process a lot of my desires for gathering with my friends and cooking for them. At the same time, coping with COVID-19 and subsequently the racial uprisings or the racial disorder that is American as we know it. So all these things were just bouncing around in my mind, and I was like, all right, essay, done, got it, wrote it. And then I saw the opportunity for this residency. And during my PhD career, I've been teaching undergrad classes surrounding Black women writers. And at first, I was a little intimidated because I didn't know what artistry I had to offer. You know, it's hard to teach writing. So this first offering is a quasi class, quasi foundation, I guess, and then we'll move on into more of the applications in the next couple ones. But so I was thinking, okay, how would I talk about food with people right now? And it took me towards a couple of ideas that I've been toying with during the Black Feminist Summer School put on by Black Feminist Kitchen this summer about embodiment and about escaping the world and about building futures. And so here we are today, and I'm really excited to start this first session with you all.
Before we get started, I wanted to give a brief overview of the Mighty Network Womanly space that we'll be using to communicate and to build community over the next 3 workshops. So I have it pulled up on my screen right here. And mostly you'll be engaging with the activity feed, which is what I'm on. As you can see, there's a featured post that I already posted for everyone. That just welcomes you to the space. And then if you just keep scrolling, I have a couple of different organizing tools for the various ways we're going to engage. So I have an archive of articles rather. I really love alliteration. And this is just to share writing about food culture, or anything that touches on any of the topics that we've been covering so far. So right now I posted an article that is about spam that I found really interesting, and I will continue to cultivate some of the articles that were my inspiration or that came out after I thought about this workshop series. And then I have a giving circle. I'm going to read this one just because I think it's worth holding space for. And so this says, the space was intended for a specific purpose and around the goals of the workshops. However, not everyone can be in future relation to food because of food insecurity, income disparities, and the general effects of not only COVID-19, but also living within systemic oppression. I encourage you to use this thread to shout out some orgs doing the work, to highlight some fundraisers, and to use the limits of the workshops as openings for other ways of being in community. I realized that it was a little bit privileged of me to talk about food in such a way when a lot of people are just struggling to get by in the day by day. And so this is not enough, but this was one way I thought that we could build community and post some orgs or post some GoFundMes or however we feel fit within this section. And last but not least, I will reference a lot of readings in this first one in particular, and I always want to make sure that you have the same things I have in case you want to engage. And so here are a couple of articles that I will be referencing throughout this first session. You can also create your own posts if you'd like, right up here. And you can do a quick post, an article, a question, or I don't think you guys have access to events, but maybe you do. And also you're able to, just go and see what has been posted so far, to see some members in this space, and to see our next meeting times. Also, feel free to use this to communicate with each other. I'm pretty sure you can, oh yeah, once more people have signed up, there'll be a little online now right there that you can use, and you can just send a little bit of a blast to everyone. I think that's, yeah, right here as well. New chat. Let's see if Kaori shows up. There we go. And I could just hop in here and shoot her a line. All right, that's all I got right now. Thanks so much for being attentive.
So this is the self-guided session, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of logistics about how to engage with the presentation, since it won't be live like our next two will be. And the main thing is take it, at your speed and around your schedule. And so I thought self-guided would really be helpful, especially with the new year coming up, with all the things we have going on, to offer it to you on your time. So feel free to pause and step away. Feel free to pause and process. Feel free to watch the whole thing and then leave it alone, and then build your archive, right before the next session or before the third session. Like, there's no deadlines. I really wanted this to be a time where everyone could get the ideas in their head and let them marinate, right? Like, we don't have to always produce after we engage. So I wanted everyone to have enough time to marinate with the ideas, to think through. I'm going to post some of the readings on the website that I just showed you. If you want to read, you can. If you don't have time, that's fine. I just, I want you to have the things that I have if you would like them. So really, it's up to you how you engage. I am going to post some of the prompts on the website, and I really want to build community before our second session. From what I know today, we have a really great registration number, and we have a great community who wants to be here. And so I want to give you all the time to get into the mental space, to share and to build and to do all that. So really, this is a little bit different than probably the energy of our next two sessions, but I think it is really important to sit with ideas and to give yourself time to get into the groove. So that being said, I'm going to move into some slides and just talk through things with you. And let's get it started.
I forgot to mention that there is now an introduction post on our website where I just asked you to tell a little bit about yourself and why you're here. I also encourage you to change your picture in the system so we can see everyone, and just process a little bit in this thread and say hello to whoever has posted before you. Thanks so much, y'all.
Okay, before we start building our archives and developing the language to do that, and the vision to do that, and the process to do that, I do want to plug the next two sessions so that everybody knows what's to come and how maybe they can build their archive with the future leaning, future being the rest of these sessions, but being aware of how they may be able to build on them and to use them in different ways. So the next session is going to be called Evoking Earthseed. I believe it is on, of course, I don't have the date pulled up, but I think it's on the 14th of January. No, not at all. Yeah, it is. Yes, the 14th of January from 4 to 6. And in that one, we will be doing some communal archiving together, right? So this is this session rather is a very isolated session. You're going to be doing this, without the live Zoom, without the community. You might process on the website, but I also want us to come together. And so I thought, with a little nod to Octavia Butler, we could think about ourselves and the earth and build our archives as a communal poem of sorts, right? So next session, I want you to come with your archives, and I want you to come with diverse language to talk through some of your individual experiences to build a community. And this will make more sense after I've gone through this whole presentation, so I don't want you to worry, and also you don't have to participate in any way that does not make you feel comfortable, but there will be an opportunity to build together. And then the third session, which is on January 21st from 4 to 6, called Feeding the Homies. And for that one, I really just wanted to do a celebration, a little bit more of a share of how your archives can transform into action. And by that, I mean we're going to think through maybe, a gratitude offering or a prayer that you can come up with using your archive, depending on how you practice your spirituality. You can come up with an ingredient list for making one of the dishes that may appear on your archive. And maybe on your ingredient list, it'll be tomatoes and onions, but also a feeling or an experience you want them to throw in there, right? Like put your foot in it, building of ingredient list, like put your spirit in it, put your love in it, put, X, Y, and Z in it. So I really want us to have these robust offerings. And during that session as well, I'm going to invite some friends of mine to come and speak about their different embodied experiences with food. And I want people to be cooking if you have that skill, or at least order some Postmates. Like I'd love for you to just pop on and, share, your experience, your space, and share yourself. And again, we will build on that. Either on the website, you'll get more information towards the end of this session and in the next session to come. That's just a little bit of a snapshot so you can see, where my moves are, what I'm thinking through, and so you can be ready to go as we move through these sessions. Okay, so I think it's important to start by defining our terms, right? And so I've been using this term archive a lot in a lot of the marketing, in a lot of the conceptualization of this workshop series, but we really just need to think, well, what does she mean by that, right? What is an archive? Why might we build an archive? And so I've included some pictures of, I think, typical archives that we may have experienced if you've been in a university setting, right? And so we know archives as maybe a floor in the library or a separate building in which you can go and access a little bit of dated tangible materials, right? So you can go and pull a file, you can't bring any pens in there. You can't really it's all about being careful, right? You can't take it out of the library. You have to ask the librarian submission. You have to know how things are organized in the library. And I found it to be a very overwhelming experience. It did not feel very welcoming to how I want to engage with the past. It was a little stuffy. I still don't understand the Dewey Decimal System. Libraries give me anxiety as much as I love to read. But this is a typical archive, right? If you're thinking, okay, let's go to the archive or something about an archive. But I also found this list of other types of archives that I think are important to earmark or to know, right? And so most government facilities have an archive, right? You can go to maybe the library in your town or go to the Capitol and they have all the records of the city. There's different institutions, not just educational, but medical institutions, right? They have a record of what was. And then we have our personal and our digital archives, right? And I think maybe back in the day, personal would have been a little scrapbooking or a photo book. And now a lot of how we archive ourselves is on the internet, right? We go to Instagram, something dope has happened to us or something we need to process and we'd like to process with people, and we post something. And it's not just for immediate engagement, right? I think a lot of times, well, maybe not. I think millennials in particular have been warned of the ways our internet or our digital footprint can come back to haunt us. But that is an archive, right? And I think, and I'm happy to see the ways that we've moved away from the fear of the internet as reminding us of our past and sort of embrace the internet as something that we can really use to build our legacies, right? And so one thing about all what these archives have in common, though, is an attentiveness to the past, right? It's difficult to archive a present, right? The present is always fleeting. But in my deployment of an archive, I always want to think about an archive as something that is imaginative and something that can create a different future, right? So instead of thinking about, oh, I really need to remember this moment, right? This needs to go in my archive. This was dope. Also thinking about it as, oh, I need to remember this moment, and this moment is a step towards X, Y, and Z, right? And X, Y, and Z can be whatever future vision you have. Another term that I think is important to define for our workshop purposes is the future, or how am I envisioning futurity? And I wanted to speak on this a little bit, just so that we all can think of futurity as robust. I think often as someone who socialized as a young girl, our futurity is really, and even just in heteropatriarchy or like straight culture, our futurity is very much tied into giving birth and having children, right? And so I think often that limits the scope of our imagination in how we can be more cognizant of a futurity that does not have to be birthed biologically or otherwise, you know, like it doesn't have to exist in this one person or these multiple people, but it can exist in a multitude of ways. And that's not to like discredit people who do have children, but it's more so to think about how we've been socialized for the future to only be, you know, seen through the child or seen through this and that, because we understand how finite our lives are. But I think when we instead lean into futurity as something else, we are able to build better ones. And so I wanted to take a little bit of a moment to talk about what I think about when I'm saying the future. And a lot of that has to do with pleasure and with community, right? So if you can think about the future as belonging to your neighbor maybe, or your friend, I don't want to say neighbor, not all neighbors are good, but your friend or your friend's kin, then that allows for a future that's not so dependent on your procreation, in which you can rely on people in different ways and build different networks. But I think most importantly, my idea of the future is very much dependent on the idea of pleasure, right? So I don't necessarily want a future that's hard, right? I think it'll be hard to get to the future I desire, but in my imagining, I want there to be abundant pleasure in the future. And a lot of people get pleasure from food. But I also want to take the time to acknowledge that like food is a very tenuous space for a lot of us, right? Diet culture is big in America or in the world, and fat phobia is a big thing, right? So I'm aware of the ways that not everyone can find pleasure in food, but I think through an embodied experience of pleasure, we can build better futures. And a lot of what I'm thinking is in homage or is in line with what Adrienne Marie Brown has been theorizing in her text, Pleasure Activism, in particular ways. I just wanted to read a little bit of that to earmark some of the ways I'm thinking about pleasure as future building, and also to segue us into our next section about citational practice. So this is from Pleasure Activism, and it's on page 13. What is pleasure activism? Pleasure is a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. Activism consists of efforts to promote, impede, or direct social, political, economic, or environmental reform or stasis with a desire to make improvements in society. Pleasure activism is the work we do to reclaim our whole, happy, and satisfiable selves from the impacts, delusions, and limitations of oppression and/or supremacy. Right. And so at one point, she's talking through pleasure as something that's individualistic, that's an affect that we feel in ourselves. But at the same time, she's thinking about action. Activism is all about action. So how do we make these pleasures enactable? How do we make them maybe reproducible for others? And how do we make sure that our pleasure is giving towards a communal pleasure as well? And I really love her attention to the systems that will try to impede this, right? Like I said, this is not an easy task, but it is important to want satisfaction and enjoyment of our lives and of our futures. And this book doesn't have a section on food, but I think easily maybe some of us in this group could write a little section, because I think food is a really big point of pleasure for a lot of people. And I think that's mainly because of the way it employs all of our senses, right? It's a sensory experience. And I say that not to be ableist in any way. I think people who have different access to their senses may experience, heightened senses in another area, or altered senses. But I'm really invested in food as something that nourishes your body, right? So the embodiment, you digest it, it gives you energy, it pushes you forward, but also the experience of it, right? You look at a beautiful plate, or you might touch the dough as you knead it. You smell the onions and garlic cooking, right? You hear the baking sizzling, right? Like your all of your senses are elevated, and you get to taste it, right? And we don't necessarily taste a lot of our other senses or the other sensory experiences. So that's where I'm thinking about the archive of future, the food archive as breeding futurity. Let's think about food as an embodied experience. Let's think about the archive as something that can actually build a future instead of lingering in the past. And let's change our definition of the future to be more robust and more imaginative. Food is also a great place to build our archive because it exists on the axes of various realms important to our lives. For example, it tells of our family as well as ourselves, right? Food is tied to how we are raised and what identities we embodied while growing up. And then often once we leave our homes, we have completely different food experiences, right? In our homes, sometimes our parents are not the best cooks, or we eat a very particular ethnicity's cuisine, and then we're, let loose into the world. We meet friends who have different food pasts and different food archives. We try different restaurants, we travel different places, and it becomes not only something that tells of our past, but we are always creating a future through our food practices and how we engage with food culture in particular. It also tells of the land and our regionality. An important thing about food is place, right? There's a reason why certain cities have are better or are more well known for a certain cuisine, right? And a lot of that has to do with structure, right? With immigration, with opportunities, with various institutions, right? So the South is known maybe for the most authentically American food because of how enslaved peoples changed the landscape of American cuisine, right? They came here and they had to blend these European sensibilities with what they knew and how they made food taste good. And a lot of the food that is now quintessential to the South is because of those legacies. For example, in California, there's a large Asian population, right? Japanese internment camps have created, a certain landscape for the food and what kind of Japanese food we can have in California, right? And all of these things are people making futures through food, right? They were put there in shitty circumstances and in problematic circumstances that still linger today, but through their food practices, through their desires for futurity, through their desires to live on, they've created futures. And us too, the various places we will move to or live or experience will have an impact on how we build our food archive. It also melds art and science, allowing us to tune into different parts of our brains while we're cooking. Cooking is all about science. I mean, if you watch British Bake Off, baking is, you've got to measure your stuff. Why aren't people measuring their stuff, right? It's a science, and when done right, when you get the science part done, rather, the art takes over. And I think this is one of the very limited realms where I can see that collabo coming together, right? Once I learned how to make a pancake, right, I got the science down. Okay, it needs this egg, it needs this flour, it needs to be this temperature, the butter can't burn. Then I can throw whatever I want into them pancakes. I can make them vegan. I can put a twist, So it's a great mental exercise, I think, and that leads to this last point on the slide. It nourishes us both physically and mentally, right? We need food to carry on, to be embodied, to live. But it also helps a lot for me personally with my mental health, right? There's something about when I'm anxious, just getting in the kitchen and just chopping. Just chop some onions, girl. You'll be all right. Throw some butter in. Listen to the read. Everything will be all right until I'm done with this meal. But it does nourish us in a multitude of ways, right? And so it's just ripe with future visions and with pleasure that I'm really excited to explore. Some of the major terms that I've been using throughout various promotions of this workshop series, I wanted to talk a little bit about citational practice within our archives. As you saw earlier, I brought up Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown, and I just wanted to take a little bit of time to tell you why I cite. Citations often are seen as something that excludes people from engaging and lingers within problematic university or institutional structure. Instead, I think of citations as a way to bring the past into our future-making practices. We're not alone in our thinking or our living, right? And so I didn't come to anything I know by myself. And a lot of the people that I have read that have brought me to this vision for this workshop are important to the workshop's success. And so I'm going to bring them in for a little bit here. And I just wanted to sort of level the playing field and just say, like, don't feel like you are being excluded by these citations, right? I think citations, again, are just a way to pay homage. They should always be presented, and I hope that they come off as something that is generative instead of exclusionary. I will try to have anything I read as a quote on a slide because I learn by reading. I can't really hear passages and like understand them. So I'm trying to help bridge that gap if that is a bridge you would need. But overall, I just don't want anyone to feel like, oh, I didn't do the homework or I don't know enough to engage with this. That is not the point of my citational practice, at least. My citational practice is because I have read so many dope Black women, Black people authors that often don't get the shout outs that they deserve for how they are actually brought into the future. And so this is my homage to them. And so on the slide again, do not be bashful in bringing these outside sources into the space. However, be generous with how you bring others into the space and leave room for inquiries and debate. I know a lot of you are experts on things that I am not an expert on, and I want you to bring that knowledge into the space, right? We are building a communal future, but also be open to people asking clarity questions if you have the actual resource provided, right? We don't want people going out of their way to spend, if they do not have it, just to have access to our things, right? So just making sure you're presenting things with openness and with leaving room for inquiry. And citations do not have to reinforce power structures. For example, you don't have to cite quote unquote experts or people that are established in their field. Instead, you can cite children in our lives who are thought makers, cite some TikToks, cite each other, and cite yourself, right? We are all making futures. We're all making knowledge. And I use knowledge very, I guess, ironically or not in the ways people intend, right? I don't think of knowledge as something that belongs in a certain space, right? It belongs to us all, and it comes from a variety of spaces. So bringing all these knowledges into the space is important. And this last point, we are all deeply able to create the worlds we want and to give ourselves credit within this world-making practice. As you build your archives, I hope you see the way that you have been building futures, right? Maybe not with that explicit of a term. Maybe you were just trying to get some food on the table, but that is a building of a future, right? You are creating the archive of food for whoever you nourished for that meal, even if it was just yourself, right? So I want us to be generous with ourselves, right? We're doing the thing. Most of my future visions and general thinking surrounding the topics of these workshops stem from Black feminist theory. In my PhD studies, I have been really dedicated to reading in this field, to teaching in this field, and to building my own legacy within this field. And a lot of that knowledge, that education was self-informed, right? I think we still do not teach Black feminism in the proper ways with as much urgency as we should. And I've been lucky to have some great professors that have helped with this learning. But I really left undergrad wanting to understand how race and gender were informing my lived experiences. And I got my degree in gender studies at Duke University, and I probably read one Black feminist theorist throughout that whole ordeal, right? And so even though I was getting this quote unquote good education, I still didn't see myself in a lot of the things that we were engaging with. And so I've made it my point to educate myself on Black feminist theory and Black feminist literature and to try my best to bring other people into this legacy as well. And so part of my citational practice today is bringing them into the space and paying homage to the people who got me to where I am today to speak with you. And so I start with Sojourner Truth and this drawing from the Reston Center because her speech, Ain't I a Woman, has often been credited with the first instance of an acknowledgement of how race changes gendered privilege, right? And throughout the speech, I mean, it's very famous. You can find it online, but she's basically marking all of the privileges white women get based off of their gender and all the ways in which that gender does not carry to her Black body, right? And so it's a really seminal text in thinking through a type of identity formation that had not been properly attended to before. And then I move on to Combahee River Collective because they move a little bit further than just race and gender to think about class and sexuality in particular ways as being instrumental to how we organize around identity politics as Black women. And this is a reunion, not a reunion, but it's basically an interview of all of the founders of the Combahee River Collective by Kianga Yamada Taylor called How We Get Free, that actually talks to them about how they came to the inception of the Combahee River Collective as a collective of Black lesbian organizers, how socialism and a strong critique of capitalism became central to their politics, and how, you know, their politics was informed by their time. In the Combahee River Collective statement, they talk a lot about movements of the 60s and 70s that really just did not think about Black women at all, right? So in the women's lib movement, they were excluded. In the civil rights movement, they were devalued. And so they thought about, well, how might we organize from our own personal experiences, and through their personal experiences, sexuality and class in particular, and building a third world feminism, right? So I would say today we might call it women of color feminism at the forefront of their organizing. And I highlight these two texts because they draw connections between different centuries of Black women's struggles and emphasize some premises of Black feminist thinking, right? This is not all of them, but for the purposes of our workshop, these are the ones I'm going to talk through. The first being, of course, that race complicates how we fight for gender equality. The second, that sexuality, class, religion, ability, place, etc., must be considered as well. So they might be credited, I don't like using the term intersectionality, but they might be credited as putting intersectionality into practice before Kimberly Crenshaw created the theory in her writing. And last but not least, that our daily lives often inform our biggest political stakes, and by being attentive to these lives, we can fight for better futures. And I think that last point, I hope that helps inform how you're going to be thinking about the past and building your archives. Your daily lives are worthy of study. They tell us a lot about what we like, what we don't like, what impedes us, and what drives us. And those should be considered worthy in our theorizing and in our organizing. I also wrote a Black feminist theory as it deals with domestic labor in particular in the kitchen space. Black women have been within housemaking roles since enslavement. They are, again, credited with, well, they aren't credited, but they should be credited with creating American cuisine. And so, of course, Black feminist theory is going to think about the workspace that Black women did in white homes to build their analysis of class and gendered inequality. But the kitchen table also was moved into a generative space. And so I'm thinking through the kitchen table press that was created by some of the members of Combahee River Collective, as well as Audre Lorde and others. And that was an independent press that was working to put out women of color's writing about various topics. And I actually will include an essay that I think Barbara Smith wrote. I'm sorry if I miscited that. Barbara Smith wrote just at announcing the press onto our website. So the kitchen table press got their name from the kitchen table, and I don't have the direct quote, but I will put on the slide. But it basically said because the kitchen table or the kitchen was a space of nourishment for Black families and for Black women in particular, and a lot of the discussion and a lot of the healing and a lot of the work went into the kitchen. I also just always need to shout out Carrie Mae Weems, one of my favorite photographers, and her series, the Kitchen Table series. That's another instance of Black feminist thinking within the kitchen space. And Kitchen Table series is not at all about food. I included one scene or one tableau where she is feeding someone. But for the most part, it's just snapshots into her life around the kitchen table. And has her daughters in some of them, or in some young children, some friends are in some other ones, some lovers are in some other ones, and she is solitary in a lot of them. And I'm just, it's interesting to pay attention to the ways that the kitchen is deployed for reflection in these pieces, and also for production, right? So here Mae Weems returns to the scene to think about herself, and Kitchen Table Press uses that scene to build a future, or to put out information. Similarly, we always need to pay attention to the ways that food is gendered, right? Women have been the homemakers, for better or for worse, over the years. They've been delegated to that role. That role is exhausting. Nobody wants to do the dishes. Nobody wants to cook every day. But it's also enabled the kitchen to become a really generously feminized space, right? It's a space where you can talk, you can be vulnerable, you can dance, you can eat, you can gather, you can, it's a wonderful space for the touchy feelies, I think. And I think if we need to give that more credit, it's okay to lean into that feminine space and that feminine energy. Black feminist theory not only allowed me to revisualize myself as a gendered and racialized person, to think through the kitchen table in more nuanced ways, but also to critique archives and how archives have been taken over by Western ideas of knowledge and epistemology, which is a fancy word for knowledge. And so I'm going to turn a little bit to embodied archives, and that's the term I've given to how I think Black feminist theory in particular, or Black feminist writing, has informed how I have presented the archive for you today. And I could not put on this and say the word archive this many times without shouting out the Cynthia Hartman book that is on the screen, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, Intimate Histories of Social Upheaval. Pretty sure it has a new subtitle now, but I don't know that one by heart. And I love this book, and I'm going to post a short essay that she got published on, I think, Brick Magazine's website from the book. But I love it because she returns to the archive, she returns to sociological texts, and she infuses personhood into a lot of the sociological texts from the Great Migration that dehumanized Black people, right? And so she's pulling these pictures where we don't really have a descriptor, we don't have names of people, we just see the room, and she's infusing what might be seen as dire circumstances with life, right? Like people lived there, people exist there, people ate there, slept there, all of the things. And she also works through a lot of W.E.B. Du Bois's work on Black people, I believe, up north. I don't know the city, so I'm not going to misquote myself. And just thinking through how to make that a more robust gendered analysis. And what I love the most about this book, and what I carry with me in this, and you'll see in my food archive, is the attentiveness to the sensory experiences that often are not captured in the archive. Because it is all visual for the most part, or written, you don't necessarily get to use the other senses. And so I'm going to read a brief excerpt from the Brick Magazine article that I have posted on our website called The Terrible Beauty of the Slum, just to highlight the way I'm thinking about an embodied archive as a sensory experience. And so it goes. What you can hear if you listen: the guttural tones of Yiddish making English into a foreign tongue, the round, open-mouthed sounds of North Carolina and Virginia bleeding into the hard-edged language of the city and transformed by the rhythm and cadence of northern streets, the eruption of laughter, the volley of curses, the shouts that make walls vibrate and jar the floor. Yes, ooh, baby, that's so good. The sweet music of an extended moan that hushes the ones listening, eavesdroppers wanting more despite knowing they shouldn't. The rush of impressions, the musk scent of tightly pressed bodies dancing in a basement saloon, the inadvertent brush of a stranger's hand against yours as she moves across the courtyard, a glimpse of young lovers huddled in the deep shadows of a tenement hallway, the violent embrace of two men brawling, the acrid odor of bacon and hoe cake frying on an open fire, the honeysuckle of a domestic's toilet water, the maple smoke rising from an old man's corncob pipe. A whole world is jammed into one short block crowded with Black folks, shut out from almost every opportunity the city affords, but still intoxicated with freedom. The air is alive with the possibilities of assembling, gathering, congregating. At any moment, the promise of insurrection, the miracle of upheaval, small groups, people by themselves, and strangers threaten to become an ensemble to incite treason in mass. I know that was a very big excerpt, but if we were to go back and just circle all the sensory language, you can see how it's deliberately used to build a more encompassing vision of not only the past, but of our future, right? If we are the future that was born from these pasts, we can see the similarities, we can see the differences. And I think when removed from the archive and given life, we can see like the pleasure in that legacy, in what we are born from. And just to return to this slide really fast, what else is on this slide? Let's see. Black feminism and other minoritarian understandings of archives allow us to think beyond what was captured when the past was constructed. They encourage us to be imaginative in our interactions with the past, as well as aware of why concealment is often a tool to make it through. Often, the archives we desire to keep are not deemed worthy by institutional archival practices, which makes it even more important for us to create our own. And tied to this thinking that was illuminated for me through Saidiya Hartman is an essay by Alice Walker that comes from the book In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, and it's the essay with the same title, In Search of Our Mother's Garden. And I just want to earmark that one right quick as well, because I think it pushes our understanding of art open, right? In the essay, she's basically talking about how her mother would have never, or Black women in particular, were not able to be writers. And she traces that through, systemic, illiteracy and all of those things. But she comes to her mother as a figure in which she still learned a lot from, or who still left a legacy, even if she was not able to write the written word, right? And she does that through her mother's garden. And so she builds an understanding of the ways Black women are left out of history, but leaves us with this beautiful portrait of how her mother was making the future, was making art through her gardening practices. And I love teaching this essay in particular because it allows for us to move away from stuffy understandings of whatever we're studying, right? So if we're studying art, we can think about a garden as art instead of just, a novel or a painting. And I want to bring this same attitude towards food. When you're building your archives, it doesn't have to resemble food at all to be a part of your food archive, right? It can be a sound that maybe an album you listen to in the kitchen a lot. It can be who's in the kitchen with you. It can be, I noticed that it is only when my mother is working in her flowers that she is radiant, almost to the point of being invisible, except as creator, hand and eye. She's involved in work her soul must have, ordering the universe in the image of her personal conception of beauty. Her face, as she prepares the art that is her gift, is a legacy of respect she leaves to me for all that illuminates and cherishes life. She has handed down respect for the possibilities and the will to grasp them. For her, so hindered and intruded upon in so many ways, being an artist has still been a daily part of her life. This ability to hold on, even in very simple ways, is work Black women have done for a very long time. This poem is not enough, but it is something for the woman who literally covered the holes in our walls with sunflowers. They were women then, my mama's generation, husky of voice, stout of step, with fists as well as hands, how they battered down doors and ironed, starched white shirts, how they led armies, head-ragged generals across mined fields, booby-trapped kitchens to discover books, desks, a place for us, how they knew what we must know without knowing a page of it themselves. Guided by my heritage of a love of beauty and a respect for strength, in search of my mother's garden, I found my own. So I just want to take a few minutes to think through what Alice Walker has presented for us in the quote that I pulled. And I'm especially interested in how her mother as creator orders the universe, right? And if anything, that's what I'm hoping people feel like they can glean out of this workshop series, right? By being more future leaning in our food. I don't want to say control, because control in food has problematic, tension, especially with people who have disordered eating and stuff like that. But ordering the world according to the skills you have and the creation you want, and finding beauty in that, right? And so Alice Walker's mother does that through gardening, and we together will meditate on food as a practice of that as well. We have arrived at the arts and crafts time. Food archiving. All right, so I have come up with 3 different ways to engage with a food archive based off of just how my brain's been working. As always, do you. If you are more of a, let's say, collage maker, I think it would be really fun to do this as a collage with maybe some text inserted. If you like to make zines, do you. If you like to photograph, that's another way to enter into this, right? So this can be a multitude of things, but I'm going to walk you through how I thought of it. So by food archiving, I basically mean building some type of past of your food experiences, right? And so the archiving part is really just being attentive to the past, being attentive to who we're bringing into the future with us in order to build our future visions. And the 3 methods that I have come up with for doing this is through a sensory journal or a sensory list, through timeline, right? So linearly through time, and then through place, which I have to draw out because I'm a visual thinker. But basically, letting food take you to the places it needs to take you. More on that later. And again, this will be mostly a past archive, and we'll build the future through our communal melding of our archives together. So I don't want you to think you have to reinvent anything, or that you have to come up with like new language for things unless you want to. It really is just being attentive to the past in whatever way is most generative. So I'm going to hopefully pull up my iPad onto the screen and just start drawing some of mine. And if not, there'll be a slide coming up shortly where I will talk through my vision. So as mentioned throughout, I came up with about 3 different ways to build your archives. Again, take the workshop as it is and build however you see fit. But the first one was an exploration of sensory experiences with food. Again, if you do not utilize these senses in the same ways, that's okay. If you want to leave some out, that's okay as well. But I started with sight and sound, and I thought that was sensory was a really great way to both list items and also to build more descriptive language for our archives. So as you can see in mine, I have on sight some very concise and of the kitchen terms, like watching onions cook and how their color changes from opaque or when they're raw to when they're translucent and cooked through. I have some tangible things like measuring out ingredients, where you have to look and make sure everything is measured. And then I just have some visions of different people I see in the kitchen, right? So my grandmother as one person I can reflect on, my aunties as another. And then I was just thinking through, the different ways food has been present in my life, right? So thinking about when you have plentiful food versus scant amounts of food, and the affect that brings regardless of the quantity. And the same for sound. Just have some really brief descriptors like grease popping or timers going off or like the general shuffle. But then I also wanted to think about the music I listen to when I'm cooking. Like cooking is a very meditative space, and so I listed some of the different things I engage with in the kitchen, as well as again reflecting on the sound of people within the kitchen with me. Um, and this is just a really great way for you to think about more poetic language for your archive and to build from there. I've also started to build my archive around smell and touch. Smell is really important to cooking. It tells you when food is done. It draws people in. It's one of the main senses we use that triggers our nostalgia or allows us to travel other places. And then, of course, touch, right? So, like, what does it feel like? Maybe when you're kneading a dough or cutting some vegetables, or like the nice touches you got in the kitchen, right? Someone brushing behind you, maybe someone you care about coming up and hugging you and thanking you for the meal. So just being cognizant of both of those as well. I haven't started my taste archive yet, but I encourage some of you who may be having difficulty processing that way to start with taste and maybe just list your favorite recipes or your favorite dishes, and then trying to build a sensory experience based off of those dishes. Okay, the other two ways that I came up with thinking about an archive were linearly, right? So according to time and through space. And for both of these, it was easier for me to draw them out. So I'm going to do a little bit of drawing with you all. And so for linearly, I was just thinking about time as a straight line, right? With this maybe being one of our first food memories, and then building to 2020 or even 2021. And this can really allow you to historicize yourself in a way that a lot of people are more comfortable with. So maybe like here, I would put something about my grandma's cooking or the first meal I remember of my grandma. I'm not good with dates, so this is going to be a very guess when that actually happened. Here I might put when I got to see the Emerald Lagasse show in NYC. Here I might put going to undergrad and being exposed to different cuisines. One of my friends' undergrad was Nigerian, or is Nigerian rather, and I lived with her for a while in LA, and I distinctly remember how she made really simple, flavorful food that would feed like everyone. Some of my dear friends are Korean, right? And so like getting used to those flavors, eating kimchi for the first time, eating seaweed. And then maybe in 2020, I might end with this residency or the things that got me to wanting to talk about food with people. So that's another way, and I'm just going to label this up here. And this should all have captions, so I'm really sorry if my handwriting is trash. So I'm going to erase this and go into third option. And this is a little bit more heady, a little bit more just things I've been thinking through. So if this doesn't make sense to you, do what you need to do. So I thought about space, and let me label it up here first as starting in some type of present moment, right? Let's say you have spaghetti for dinner, right? And this spaghetti just makes you think about some bomb spaghetti you had in a different city, maybe your mom's spaghetti. Word to Emina. Right. And so that one dish is allowing you to move through time and space to somewhere else. And then maybe your mom's spaghetti takes you to your hometown and a different food memory there, maybe like off-campus lunch or something. I'm being real retro right now. And like eating really cheap burritos, right? So now we move from spaghetti to these burritos just because we moved with this where the memory took us. And then maybe we'll come, oh, there's no more space, but we'll come up here and be like, but no, those burritos were dank, but I had the best breakfast burrito in this town, right? And this is more of a way to do a free association when coming to food and really taking in how the sensory experiences allows us to time travel. right? And I would encourage with any of these methods to use multiple ones at once. So if you're gonna do the space one, the space, it didn't come across as descriptive on my screen, but maybe if you do a little space drawing accompanied with a sensory journal, and you're just like, okay, site. So what do I remember about my hometown that I want to bring into the future? And maybe it is, gathering for meals that you don't really do anymore because of COVID. What kind of smells do you want to bring into the future? And you think about, well, onions and garlic, staple in both Italian and Mexican cuisine, which I just shouted out. Let's bring that into the future. And maybe that smell generates some type of understanding of touch, right? So like when you chop those ingredients, you have to touch the stainless steel to get the smell out of your hands. And similarly, if you use a different method, let's say you want to take some pictures, I would just encourage you to jot down some type of language so that others can interpret and bring your archive with them. Okay, thank you for your attentiveness. I hope that this is legible. Now that you have some tools for building your archives, I hope you go into this activity with your wholeness and really take the time to reflect on how food has enabled you to build community, to build future visions, and to nourish yourself and others. I will be posting like a Google Drive if you want to share your whole archive with the rest of us. So look for that on the website. And if not, I will see you at workshop 2. Thanks for your attention, y'all.